Pentagon has officially transitioned from theoretical contingency planning to active force generation for a kinetic campaign against the Islamic Republic of Iran. In the deep waters of the Arabian Sea, the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group has maneuvered into its terminal launch coordinates. Carrier Air Wing 9 sits ready on the deck, a lethal composition of F-35 Sea Lightning IIs and F/A-18 Block 3 Super Hornets. This maritime concentration of firepower establishes a radius of destruction extending 1,100 kilometers inland, covering Iran's most critical strategic depth. Behind this kinetic spearhead, a massive logistical backbone has quietly snapped into place across the entire Central Command theater of operations. Over 3 dozen KC-46 Pegasus aerial refuelers have forward deployed to hardened tarmacs in Jordan, maximizing the strike range of carrier-based aircraft. Each tanker acts as a force multiplier, capable of offloading over 200,000 pounds of fuel to thirsty strike packages mid-mission. Simultaneously, fleets of heavy-lift C-17 Globemasters are aggressively stripping non-essential personnel and sensitive hardware from exposed forward operating bases. Satellite reconnaissance confirms a near-total evacuation of high-value assets from Al-Udeid Air Base in Qatar and Prince Sultan Air Base. This evacuation is not a subtle diplomatic signal. It is a cold, mathematical calculation of survivability against Iranian ballistic missile capabilities. Al-Udeid sits less than 300 kilometers from Iranian launch sites, meaning a Shahab-3 missile would impact roughly 4 minutes after ignition. 4 minutes is functionally insufficient for interception protocols or personnel bunkering, forcing the Pentagon to clear the board before the first shot. The battle space is effectively being sanitized to minimize American exposure while maximizing offensive sortie generation rates from safer standoff distances. Tehran has keenly observed these vector changes and accelerated its own defensive preparations, stockpiling heavy munitions since the middle of 2025. Dark flights of Russian and Chinese heavy transport aircraft have been tracking into Tehran, delivering guidance kits and advanced interceptor missiles. The crown jewel of this new defensive posture is the Chinese-made HQ-9B surface-to-air missile system, now deployed around key nuclear sites. On paper, the HQ-9B features an active electronically scanned array radar with a detection range of 250 kilometers. Its interceptors fly at Mach 4.2, theoretically capable of tracking stealth platforms and engaging multiple targets in a saturation attack scenario. However, an integrated air defense system is only as strong as its network data links and sensor fusion capabilities. Iran's airspace defense remains a patchwork of modern Chinese batteries overlaid on legacy Soviet radars and domestic reverse-engineered systems. This lack of seamless integration creates fatal data gaps where target handoffs between defense sectors become slow or prone to error. Against fifth-generation U.S. electronic warfare and stealth penetrators, this brittleness translates to a catastrophic failure of the defensive kill chain. The fuse for this conflict was lit not by the civil protests paralyzing Tehran, but by a sudden, critical nuclear variable. Intelligence reports indicate that 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium have been moved from declared sites to unknown locations. This material, if fed into advanced IR-6 centrifuges, could be enriched to weapons-grade 90% purity within a matter of days. That stockpile represents the fissile core for 9 nuclear warheads, crossing every red line established by Washington and Tel Aviv. Diplomatic channels are effectively dead. Iran has refused to surrender the missing material or dismantle its proxy network across the region. Consequently, the operational window is closing rapidly, and the Pentagon must decide on the specific scope of the strike package. A limited strike to neutralize the nuclear program requires a specific, specialized munition, the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator. Weighing 30,000 pounds, the GBU-57 is the only conventional weapon capable of crushing the deep underground facilities of Fordow. Fordow is buried under a mountain, protected by 18 meters of reinforced concrete with a compressive strength exceeding 10,000 psi. Delivering this weapon requires the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, the only airframe structurally capable of carrying the MOP's sheer mass. If the objective expands from counter-proliferation to regime change, the target list grows exponentially from dozens to thousands of aim points. Regime change requires dismantling the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' command nodes, telecommunications, and internal security apparatus. Such a campaign would not be a surgical strike, but a sustained aerial siege lasting weeks or months of high-intensity combat. Rumors of a decapitation strike against the Supreme Leader or senior IRGC commanders have circulated since the Venezuela raid. However, exfiltration or capture operations deep inside the Iranian plateau are logistically impossible for helicopter-borne special forces. Tehran is not Caracas. It is geographically isolated, surrounded by mountain ranges, and defended by a hostile, well-armed population. Operation Eagle Claw in 1980 failed due to these precise tyranny of distance factors, and modern planners will not repeat that mistake. Therefore, any attempt to remove the leadership will rely on kinetic strikes rather than special forces boots on the ground. Yet, assassinating the supreme leader risks galvanizing the Iranian public through the powerful Shia archetype of martyrdom and resistance. The IRGC has established clear succession protocols, ensuring that the death of one leader does not collapse the state's command authority. Strategically, the U.S. faces a complex geopolitical map where regional allies are hesitant to open their airspace for offensive operations. Kuwait, Qatar, and Turkey have signaled they will not permit offensive strikes to launch directly from their sovereign soil. They fear immediate Iranian retaliation against their vulnerable oil infrastructure and critical desalination plants along the Gulf Coast. This forces American planners to utilize three primary air corridors to access Iranian airspace, bypassing reluctant regional partners. The northern corridor runs from Europe, over the Black Sea, and through the airspace of Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. While politically complex, B-2 bombers could traverse this route at high altitude, effectively invisible to local search radars. The risk lies in the proximity to Russian airspace, where S-400 batteries in Syria or southern Russia might track thermal signatures. If Moscow relays tracking data to Tehran, the element of surprise critical for the B-2's survival would be instantly compromised. The Central Corridor utilizes the complex airspace of Israel, Jordan, and Iraq to strike Iran's western border directly. With KC-46 tankers loitering securely over Jordan, this route offers the most efficient fuel logistics for tactical fighters like the F-35. While Iraq will officially deny airspace access, its radar network lacks the fidelity to track low observable fifth-generation airframes. F-22 Raptors would act as forward quarterbacks, sanitizing the corridor for non-stealth assets by systematically suppressing Iraqi and Iranian border radar. The Southern Corridor, launching from the Indian Ocean, offers the highest operational freedom, completely bypassing the political complications of Arab airspace. This vector allows the U.S. Navy to leverage the full weight of the Carrier Strike Group and Diego Garcia-based heavy bombers. From this angle, B-52H Stratofortresses can launch AGM-158J ASS and ER cruise missiles from well outside the range of Iranian coastal defenses. This standoff capability allows the Pentagon to saturate Iranian targets with mass precision fire without risking a single pilot in contested airspace. Before kinetic impacts occur, the conflict will initiate in the fifth domain, the silent, invisible digital battle space of cyber warfare. U.S. Cyber Command would likely execute pre-planned logic bombs embedded deep in Iran's critical infrastructure, mirroring the Stuxnet methodology. The objective is to blind the enemy, severing fiber optic command links, scrambling radar, telemetry, and isolating individual air defense nodes. By degrading the enemy's situational awareness to zero, the physical strike force encounters a disorganized, deaf, and blinded opponent. Yet, the strategic efficacy of these strikes depends entirely on the political end state currently being defined by the White House. If the goal is strictly counter-proliferation, the target set remains finite: Fordow, Natanz, and the centrifuge production lines. However, a regime change mandate requires dismantling the IRGC's ability to govern, a task that historically yields unpredictable vacuums. Decapitating the leadership structure often accelerates radicalization rather than submission, as seen in previous disastrous interventions in Iraq and Libya. The IRGC is designed as a decentralized hydra. Removing the head does not kill the body, it merely fragments the command structure. Anticipating this, Tehran has developed an asymmetric counter-strategy centered on inflicting intolerable economic pain on the global market. Iran's retaliation doctrine is proportional to the threat, a ladder of escalation designed to restore deterrence without triggering total annihilation. In a low-level escalation scenario, Iran would activate its proxy network to conduct harassing fires against U.S. assets in Iraq and Syria. This allows Tehran to strike back, plausibly deniably, signaling resolve while keeping the conflict below the threshold of general war. A mid-level response shifts the focus to energy security, targeting the vulnerable oil infrastructure of U.S. allies in the Gulf. We observed this capability in 2019, when Iranian drones successfully bypassed U.S. air defenses to strike the Saudi Abqaiq processing facility. A repeat of such attacks would spike global oil prices overnight, creating immediate economic pressure on Washington to cease operations. Additionally, the IRGC Navy would utilize swarm tactics with fast attack craft to harass commercial shipping in the narrow Strait of Hormuz. By threatening the transit of 20% of the world's oil supply, Iran effectively globalizes the cost of an American attack. However, if the U.S. campaign threatens the regime's survival, Tehran will ascend to the highest rung of the escalation ladder. This high-level response involves unannounced mass ballistic missile launches targeting U.S. bases across the Central Command Theater. The saturation of Patriot and THAAD batteries would be attempted through sheer volume of fire, utilizing Sejil and Khorramshahr ballistic missiles. Such a move invites total war, a scenario where the U.S. would be forced to dismantle the Iranian state entirely. While Washington and Tehran calculate their moves, a third player is waiting for the chaos to create an operational opportunity. Israel views the potential U.S. strike not just as a delay mechanism, but as a chance for total military sterilization. Tel Aviv understands that a post-conflict power vacuum in Iran offers a fleeting window to destroy non-nuclear threats permanently. Should the Iranian command structure fracture under U.S. bombardment, the Israeli Air Force is prepared to launch a secondary wave. Their target list differs from the Pentagon's. Israel seeks to obliterate missile production factories, drone depots, and R&D centers. This strategy mirrors their operations in Syria, utilizing the fog of war to degrade an adversary's conventional capabilities by decades. Israeli jets would likely strike within the golden hour of regime collapse, regardless of who assumes power next. The objective is to ensure that any successor government, friendly or hostile, inherits a demilitarized and crippled state. This creates a divergence in strategic timelines. The U.S. seeks a swift exit, while Israel seeks permanent degradation. The intersection of these interests creates a volatile environment where the scope of war can expand beyond American control. Intelligence suggests that Israeli F-35I Idir squadrons have already drilled for these specific long-range strike profiles over the Mediterranean. They are waiting for the American breach to open the door, allowing them to fly through and dismantle the interior. The geopolitical fallout of such a combined campaign would reshape the Middle East's architecture for the next half-century. However, this assumes the conflict remains strictly conventional, ignoring the localized insurgencies that would inevitably erupt. The fragmentation of Iran's security apparatus would likely release heavy weaponry into the hands of separatist movements. Baluchis in the southeast and Kurds in the northwest could seize the moment to carve out autonomous zones. This balkanization of Iran would create a massive refugee crisis and destabilize the borders of Turkey and Pakistan. Furthermore, the illusion of a clean war relies on the assumption that Russia and China will remain passive observers. Beijing relies on Iranian oil, and Moscow relies on Iranian drones for its own war effort in Eastern Europe. Neither power can afford to lose a strategic partner to American hegemony without extracting a significant cost. While they may not intervene militarily, they will provide intelligence, cyber support, and diplomatic cover to prolong the conflict. The Pentagon is therefore not planning a fight against a rogue state, but a stress test of the entire global order. This conflict will not be confined to physical geography. It will spill instantly into the digital domain, the fifth dimension of warfare. State-sponsored cyber actors will weaponize the internet, turning information infrastructure into a contested battlefield. For the civilian population, this means the fog of war will be manufactured through internet blackouts and data surveillance. Intelligence agencies utilize deep packet inspection to identify dissenters and track human movement through metadata. In this environment, the individual's digital footprint becomes a targeting vector for security services. Securing one's digital periphery is no longer a luxury but a necessity of modern operational security for civilians. Encryption tools like NordVPN effectively function as civilian-grade electronic countermeasures against state surveillance. By tunneling traffic and masking location data, such tools deny the adversary the metadata required to build a target profile. Protecting personal data prevents it from being weaponized in the information war that inevitably accompanies the kinetic one. Returning to the strategic calculus, the decision to strike rests on a fragile assessment of risk versus reward. The Pentagon is currently balancing the cost of inaction against the unpredictable variables of a regime collapse. Attack too early, and the external threat validates the regime's propaganda, rallying the nationalist base around the flag. Attack too late, and the window of opportunity closes as Iran crosses the nuclear threshold, achieving permanent immunity. Half measures, such as limited punitive strikes, fail to degrade capabilities and only serve to accelerate Iranian resolve. This is the classic use it or lose it dilemma that has historically preceded every major conflict in the region. The movement of the USS Abraham Lincoln and the prepositioning of bunker busters suggest the planning phase has ended. We are now in the execution phase, waiting only for the political trigger to initiate the sequence. However, the history of U.S. intervention in the Middle East is defined by the disconnect between military precision and political outcomes. Tactical victories in the air campaign rarely translate into stable strategic realities on the ground. Destroying the centrifuges solves the nuclear equation for 5 years, but it does not solve the Iranian geopolitical equation. The underlying friction between a revisionist Iran and the U.S.-led order will persist, merely entering a more volatile phase. Ultimately, the fuse is burning, and the mechanisms of war have effectively been automated by decades of mistrust. What happens next will not be determined by diplomatic goodwill, but by the cold arithmetic of hard power. The airspace is cleared, the tankers are fueled, and the target packages are locked into the flight computers. This is the hinge upon which the decade turns, and the consequences of the next 72 hours will outlive every policymaker in the room. Conflicts between nation-states are rarely about morality, democracy, or justice. Those are narratives for public consumption. At the systemic level, they are about the redistribution of leverage, resources, and security architecture. While the combatants exhaust their blood and treasure in the mountains of Iran, it is often the spectators who inherit the spoils. Regional rivals like Saudi Arabia and global competitors like China will position themselves to exploit the post-war vacuum. The destruction of Iranian power benefits Riyadh, while the distraction of American power benefits Beijing. This is the ruthless efficiency of geopolitics. One nation's tragedy is merely another nation's opportunity. The coming days will test the resilience of the Iranian state and the resolve of the American empire. Whether this results in a new equilibrium or a descent into chaos depends on the precision of the first strike. But in war, precision is the first casualty, and chaos is the only guarantee. The chessboard is set, the pieces are moving, and the clock has nearly run out. This report is based on current satellite telemetry, logistical movements, and historical precedent. We do not advocate for conflict. We analyze the machinery of it to understand where the gears are grinding. Reporting on the geopolitical fault lines of the 21st century. I am your host, Shervan.